So there it is, so that you can watch Vero later if you want to, or we have some old videos of Vero up there too. So if you're in the mood for our own personal French chef, you can watch those on our YouTube channel coming up soon. We'll send the link out, and we'll also send any of Vero's recipes out as well. And lastly, we just really want to thank Veronique for joining us. You guys, I think a lot of people know she's very special to us. She was a staff member. She does these sorts of presentations for us. She was the head of our board for a while. She's an excellent presenter. She has great travel programs, great cooking programs, and we're very, very lucky to have her keep coming back to us. So on that note, Veronique, take it away.
Well, thanks, Heather. So good evening, everyone. And tonight we're going to talk fondue and fondants. And this great title was suggested by the library director, Steve, who was really interested in fondue. So we're going to have cheesy talk. Yeah, that's cheesy. We're also going to talk about meats. But especially one of my favorite things during these classes is also to talk to you about the history of the dish, the culture, where it comes from, and how it evolved over time. So you see here that we have, before I forget, we have an electric fondue pot, which those are really practical. Kind of goes away from the old-fashioned like copper pot or they call it cacolon in France, with the sterno underneath. So those are a little more practical, I would say. You can adjust the temperature really quick, and you can transfer them from starting in the kitchen to the table when you have guests. And this machine is gonna come. Well, I think it's gonna come in a different box, but that's the original box, and it is going to be available to be borrowed by patrons at the Wiggin Memorial Library through the Library of Things. So I'm sure Heather or Steve will make sure that it's announced in the newsletter when the machine is available to be borrowed. I think it's a great opportunity. Most of us, it's hard to keep up with like having an instant pot, a crock pot, fondue pot, a raclette set. So I think it's a great opportunity that the library is going to have one for anybody, a patron to borrow in the future. So stay tuned on that, and I'm sure you'll read about it in the newsletter. So in France, as everybody knows, I'm French, grew up in France. There's basically two teams cheesy dishes. Okay, there's fondue or there's raclette. So they're all about cheese. They're just different method and different cheese. But a lot of the ingredients that go with them are the same, like the potatoes, the charcuterie, the bread. And what's funny is it's kind of either or. It's almost like you can't be like a fan of both. It's like cheering your special sports team. So my whole family, we spent every winter vacation skiing in the Alps, and it's always been fondue. I remember my mom making it at home. She had the set with the copper pot, and when we went to restaurants, we always wanted to have fondue, and we kind of like snarkily looking at people having raclette. Don't ask me why. There's no particular reason. My dad just thought that the cheeses used in the fondue were more refined than the cheese used in a raclette. So raclette is usually one cheese. It's raclette, and the lore has it that usually poor quality raclette cheese is basically melted leftover cheeses from a factory that are like made into this raclette cheese. Well, yes, cheap raclette, that's what it is. But good raclette cheese is a cheese that's made especially to be melted. It's usually in these special different devices, either like a little plate that you put on the heat, like a resistance. When we were kids, like they had this big resistance in the open, and then like resistors that get all red and bright from heat, and then you just put a big slice of raclette underneath, and it melts, and then you pour it over your potatoes and meat and bread on your plate. So the opposite. Fondue, we melt the cheese in the pot and then we dip the ingredients in the pot. So fondue, the cheese ones, because we're also going to talk about fondue bourguignon afterwards, which is a different type of fondue. The first record of melted cheese for a dish dates from the antiquities. It was mentioned actually in Homer's Iliad, and it was described as a dish of melted goat cheese and bread. And wine already. And then there's not really any record in history. Then we jump to 1651 in France. And it's François Pierre de la Varenne is a chef. And he publishes a book called Le Cuisinier François, which is François was the old term to say a French person. And so it's the French cook. And in his book, he publishes a recipe that is called ramequin de fromage, which is a small dish of cheese. And it's basically melted cheese and bread. It's not very elaborate. It's just mixing, stale bread and cheese, melted cheese. And then, so it's kind of like rough, it's kind of almost like using your leftover kind of thing. And then in the 18th century, there's another French chef, it's called Vincent Lachapelle. He revisits the recipe in his book, and he adds white wine, garlic, and nutmeg. So now it sounds like it's has a little more taste than just melted cheese and bread crust. And so generally the origins of the fondue Savoyard, which Savoyard means from Savoie, which is a region in the Alps, a French region. The origin are kind of like between Swiss and the French Alps. And that's because in the Swiss Alps and the French Alps, that's where most of the milk cow were raised, and most of the cheese making for both of the entire countries were. In France, it was really concentrated in Normandy and then in the Alps. Lots of cattle grazing in the mountains in the summer, grazing all natural, grass, and coming down in the barn for the winter with the grass that the farmers harvested lower in the valleys from the fields. So the cheese made from that milk has that really nutty taste. It's really special. And it's just like natural. And so the farmers, they basically ate what they, it's like you eat what you grow, or you eat what you raise. So when they have too much cheese or they have leftover milk for themselves and they make cheese out of it, and they're like, what are we doing with all this cheese? And so they also started thinking like mixing the stale bread that they had and that they usually bake themselves in wood fire ovens, and the leftover cheese, and they thought it would be a great, filling and comforting dish when you come home from working 12 hours in the field. So they kind of like started to bring it to popularity, like more people would know about it, other than just in the mountainous areas. And then after World War II, it's really the birth of the winter sports in the Alps, which is, all these ski resorts are starting to pop up everywhere. People are starting to go skiing for winter vacation. And as we go in time, it's getting more democratized. More people can afford going to winter skiing for a week in the vacation time in the winter. And so the fondue all of a sudden becomes really well known all over France and becomes really popular. And fondue has always kind of signified like, it's a common dish. You eat in the same pot, so it's very convivial. You eat it with your friends, with your family. It's when I was a kid, we would sometimes play a card game during having fondue, or a board game, or have good conversation with friends. because it's a dish you eat slowly. Because otherwise, if you eat like really quickly, you're gonna have like a big like bowl of cheese and bread in your stomach. It's gonna be really hard to digest. So really, that's kind of something that's like savored over time. That's not like, you know, you're having your half an hour break and you're gonna eat a fondue. That's more like a whole meal as a whole. And so today, the most traditional Savoyard fondue in Europe is made used only a small number of cheeses, and it's Emmentaler. So you can find that here, Emmentaler, found it. Gruyere, which is another. So Emmentaler, I just say Emmentaler is a version of Swiss cheese, but it's not Swiss cheese. And I actually will be honest and say don't use like Jarlsberg Swiss cheese or something to that effect, because it doesn't melt properly here. The Swiss cheese that's sold here is not made the same as in Europe, so it's not gonna melt properly. So your best chance is with the Gruyere, the Emmentaler, and actually the Comté, which you can find in certain stores around here. And the Comté is nutty and smooth, as it says. And all those cheeses are at least like 10 months to a year aged. And that also adds to the flavor. So one of the things I want to not forget to tell you is you can use a lot of different cheeses. You can also use fontina cheese for a fondue. Do not recommend also using cheddar cheese. When it melts, it basically has no taste. And it's gonna melt, but it's gonna reharden really quickly because it doesn't have the same fat content. Obviously, those French and Swiss cheese from Switzerland have a very high fat content, and we're quite proud of it because part of it makes the taste. So part of it brings up the flavors from the milk that was used to make the cheese. So those are your tidbits. And then if you have leftover from the cheese, I'm gonna tell you how much to use, but if you have leftovers, you can freeze it. Cheese freezes really well. You can freeze it, and you can also use it to make homemade grilled cheese. You can mix up the flavors, even if you have just like two of them. If you have just Gruyere and Emmentaler, just grate them to make a nice grilled cheese. It will be really tasty. So the cheese fondue. We're gonna turn on our little pot here, and we are turning on. So right now we're gonna turn on the pot so that the first thing we have to do is use a clove of garlic that you cut in half to open the flavor, because if you rub the outside, it's kind of just like the under the skin. It's not really super flavorful. And rub the entire pot with it. And I know but not everybody has watched my classes, my other before classes. Rubbing a clove of garlic in like a casserole, like you're gonna do a potato gratin, a potato casserole, let's say. Rubbing a clove of garlic in the pan is actually sometimes gives more garlic flavor than chopping the garlic or putting a couple of pieces here and there in the pan, in the dish itself. So I would really put the accent on rubbing the clove of garlic in the pan first is really important. You'll notice that this pan from the library that's going to be available at the library, it has the coating, so you can't I'm using this at the end of the little fondue fork right now, but it's really you need to make sure the fork is not exposed so it doesn't scratch the finish. And obviously, if you have an old-fashioned set that's like cast or like Dutch oven type or copper, you don't have that issue. But I just say it about that. So we're gonna use wine. White wine. We're gonna use cheese. We're gonna use kirsch. Just for the fondue, to make the fondue itself. We're gonna use cornstarch. I'll talk about it in a hot second. So white wine. we don't have any Alpine wine really available here because they are usually produced in small quantities, so they don't even make their way in this market. But you can buy something local or something from California. A good Chardonnay will work. It has to be fairly dry wine. If it's not like a more sweeter wine, it's gonna evaporate too quickly. It's not really gonna work. And so I would recommend a dry Chardonnay, and get something that you like, that you're gonna drink along with it. There's no point in getting some cheap wine, that you're gonna end up throwing the rest because it doesn't taste, good drinking it just like that. Just get a wine that you can drink at the same time you are having the fondue. So dry white wine. Then I've grated the 3 cheeses here with a regular hand grater. Same. Hand grating is better than grating with the processor because the processor heats up the molecules and usually like it clumps together. I would say that those cheeses, because they have a high fat content, they are very they get soft when you grate them really fast. So I put them in the freezer for like half an hour before I grated them, and that really helps. So that's a tip. So either a grater, or you can also use a potato peeler. So when we were kids, my mom would always have us use the potato peeler or vegetable peeler, whatever you want to call it, and you just because it's gonna be like fine slices. And you just make like little cuts, little passage like that, so you get like little pieces, and that's totally fine consistence to melt the cheese. You can also dice, but you have to dice like really fine, really small, and honestly, the best method to melt and to get the right consistency is just to grate. The other reason why we're grating is, and that's kind of something I'm not gonna say new to me, but I'm gonna say that it's my mom would make the fondue without cornstarch or potato starch. When you make big quantities of fondue, it's to your advantage to use it. I'm not really a fan, but if you're gonna use cornstarch, and I put the proportion in a recipe, it's like, if you make a fondue for 4, you're gonna use about a tablespoon. And so there's 2 methods. Either you mix the cornstarch with your cheese, which is what I've done here. Sorry. Or you can also make a slurry, like you would to thicken like a chili or something, with the kirsch, when you're going to use the kirsch. So kirsch is the other thing we're going to use at the end. You don't have to use kirsch if you don't want to use more alcohol than the white wine. I will say that the white wine is just giving flavor. It pretty much like the alcohol mostly evaporates while it's cooking the cheese. So it's not gonna be like you're gonna fall backwards because you're not putting that much white wine anyways. If you want to add a little more taste, in France they add either kirsch, which is black cherry liqueur, or cognac, and that's gonna be at the end when all the cheese is melted. So if you wanted to do the cornstarch at the end, you can either add it in the cheese, coat the cheese, or do a slurry with the kirsch. The end. So I turn this on to 5. So I just want the wine to simmer a little bit. And I'm not going to talk proportion on the TV on the TV show. Everything is going to be written in the recipes, okay? Because I'm doing like a half size here, so I don't have like 3 gallons of fondue. So that's why I'm just doing half proportion. So we get the wine to just like simmer. And then we're gonna start adding our cheese. The other thing is when we do fondue, we're always using a wooden spoon. So whichever you fancy, wooden spoon. We use wooden spoon to stir. And when we melt the cheese, we want to be right there stirring, because if we go away, walk away, and come back, we're gonna get just a big clump, and we don't want a big clump. We want something like smooth. And so the wine is simmering. So I'm gonna start adding, and I'm doing like little handfuls and like sprinkling. Okay, so it doesn't also clump. And then I'm stirring in an H shape, like infinity sign. And I just keep stirring. And as soon as I see that what I just put in here is melted, I continue to add more and slowly cook it, to have everything melted. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to talk about what do we eat with the fondue. And everything is kind of here. It's my little wooden postcard I received from my family recently. I love all these little alpine designs. And I'll try to show more before the end of the show. So with fondue, we have obviously bread. And we cut it in about croutons, about like almost an inch square. I mean, there's no definition, exact science to it. The bread, you want it to be almost stale. You don't want like the fresh, super nice baguette that you just got at an expensive bakery. You want stale bread, and you want either like sourdough or like a multi-grain loaf. You can certainly present different breads, so it gives kind of like an assortment for people. What you don't want is soft breads, like processed breads, the sliced processed bread we buy to make sandwiches. Because if you get that, even if it's stale, it's just gonna kind of like crumple apart when you put it in the fondue, and then you're gonna just keep sprinkling bread in there, and you're not gonna come out with your fork with quite much. And it's because it gets, even if it's stale, it's really, first of all, it takes weeks to be stale, but even if you like say make croutons out of it in the oven, it's gonna just get soft as soon as you put it in the fondue. So recommend just like buy a loaf of bread, and what you want is all the pieces with the crust. So if you buy a big loaf of bread, you're not going to take the we call it mie, like the meat that's inside, without some piece of crust. Because the crust, when we use our fork, we're just going to pick it in the crust like that, and it's going to hold better when we dip. So that's the reason why. I was going to say something else about the bread. Yeah, if you have fresh bread, like let's say it's just like, oh, okay, I'm making a fondue in 2 hours for my friends. I'm running to the store to get a loaf of bread. It's gonna be quite fresh. Cut big slices. Make croutons. Cut slices, cut in cubes. Oven on a baking sheet, 350 for 12 minutes. That's Martha Stewart recipe that I saw a long time ago, and it absolutely worked. No oil, no nothing, no coating. You don't want to oil the bread that you're gonna now then dip in the fondue. So just cut the bread and put it in the oven, and it's gonna make you nice croutons, barely started to golden at 12 minutes, and that's what you want. You don't want like a super hard crouton that you're gonna break the teeth on. You just want something that's gonna hold up when you dip it in the fondue. So that's the tip about the breads. And then the accompaniments for a fondue. So you can also boil small potatoes. I really like the fingerling potatoes, but they are hard to find, but you can find them around here. I don't want to name names of stores because I don't want to be sued. Kidding. So small potatoes, boil them, then you can maybe cut them, those are a little big, cut them in half. And those you can also pick at the end of your fork and dip in the fondue. You can do apple slices. It's really good. It depends if you're sweet and savory, you can do that. And then you absolutely want to have some charcuterie. So those are smoked meats. This is a pretty good assortment actually that I felt I was really glad to see Copa. That's a type. It's like smoked pork tenderloin, but it's really good. And Copa is done the way it's done in Italy, so it's really good. Then there's like uncured salami and prosciutto. So those are dry sausage. I mean that's the kind of meat you want to serve with along with the fondue. You can also have we call that jambon blanc, which is white ham, which is just regular ham, like maybe one of those herb hams, nice quality ones, or peppered hams would be really nice with it too. It's good for kids, maybe young kids who don't want like the kind of smoked meat. That would be a little nicer and smoother for them. And then we also serve the fondue with cornichons, which are the mini pickles, and those you can find any store around here. They are like really mini gherkins. Highly recommend those. They're really good, really crunchy, and their acidity kind of balances the richness of the cheese. And so that's a really good, like almost like palate cleanser along with the fondue. There's those little white onions, which are my favorites. And then you can serve gardiniera, Italian gardiniera. So those are pickled vegetables like carrots and peppers and green beans and cauliflower. That's a really good accompaniment to a fondue. So I think I have all my cheese in here. And it's melted nicely. And so I forgot to say, I think, what the cornstarch does. So the cornstarch theory is that it helps the fat not separate from the cheese itself. Sometimes if you go too fast, like if you have your temperature too high when you're melting the cheese, it can happen pretty quickly. And then it's kind of hard to get back if the cheese separates and the fat stays on top. It's kind of like not appetizing. The taste doesn't change, but it's not really appetizing, and it's actually all the oil that stays on top is basically wasted because and the cheese hardens faster in the fondue. So I don't know if you can see. Heather say yes. You can see the fondue right there. So it's really oops, it's okay. It's really nicely melted.
Yes, we can see it, Vero. It looks beautiful.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. So that's our fondue, and I wish you were all here to taste it. Sorry. I was going to tell you a couple more things. Oh, I forgot to put the kirsch in there. So kirsch, you usually put like 1 or 2 tablespoons. I mean, it's just for the taste. So I'm just going to put a little bit because I didn't do all the cheese here. And you put it at the end when you're sure everything is melted. And hold on, let me get the plug back. Of course, it has a magnetic plug, which is really good. So if somebody decides to walk away from the table and trips, the pot of cheese fondue doesn't fall on your feet or on somebody's seat. Oh, and this just smells like magnificent cherry, which is really nice. So I've talked about nutmeg. So nutmeg from the chef Pierre de la Varenne in the 18th century, who told us to put nutmeg in our fondue. So just, I mean, I'm talking like just, if you have the nuts, just like one grating, like that's it, just a little touch. It definitely adds something. And then in France, we usually serve a big salad along with the fondue because the fondue is quite rich. We want something French, crunchy. And personally, I love endive salad. So same endives. Right now, the winter is the season for endives because they grow in the dark. And if you can find endives or if you like endives, there's those. And then there's the one that's kind of burgundy. Those are great to go with this, or a really crunchy salad like romaine, but something that's going to really give you, complement the fondue texture itself. Will be really nice. So I need to tell you a little lore about the fondue. So first of all, the fondue pork, they all have colors. So usually when you invite people, like people kind of choose their colors and they don't see the color, they just pick. It's just like pick one when you sit at the table, and it's like a fun game. Like, oh, I didn't want green, give me yours. So I guess Trisha chose green and Heather chose orange, I think. And I usually choose blue because that's my favorite color. So it's just like a fun that adds. It's all those little things that add to the conviviality of having this. It's just not like, sit down and eat. There's kind of a little more around it. It's really fun. And then there's this, it's kind of a lore, but supposedly if somebody loses their bread in the pot, which happens often, especially later when you eat the dish when there's not as much cheese left, people lose their bread out of the pot, so you are forbidden to fish it out. It's very not proper. And everybody's like making fun of you. And if a woman loses the bread in there, supposedly she has to kiss her neighbor at the table, if there's a man next to her. But that's all like a joke. So I think having the fondue is really fun. And the last thing I want to tell you is, for example, I'm not going to eat that fondue tonight, but I'm certainly not throwing that cheese out away. So you can do two things. You can put it in the fridge for like 2 days, let it cool first, obviously transfer it, because of this pot, transfer it to another pan, like a glass dish preferably. Let it cool on the counter, put it in the fridge, and then, or you can actually freeze it. And you can freeze it for up to 2 months, I would say, after that. So I would say, freeze it. If you have some leftover, freeze it for a couple of weeks, and then let it eat it up. When you go to eat it, warm it up really slowly. So either use the pot, like this pot if you have one, because you can go you can go from 1 to 8, and I only went to 3 today. So you can go to 1 and let it warm really slowly. Use a crock pot if you have like a small one, or if you're gonna go on the stove, I would put it in a double boiler so the bottom doesn't seize and burn. But the secret is warm it really slowly and do not warm it in the microwave. But that's good. That's a good thing to know, that you can actually keep it and not have to throw what's left. Also, when you're with guests and everybody was super happy, there's barely any fondue left at the bottom of the pot, and everybody's trying with their bread to scrape the last of the fondue. What we used to do is we use an egg yolk, and we just break it in, and then we were able to scrape everything, all the cheese with it, with your bread, and it's egg yolk and bread. Same, no rhyme, no reason. That's what we did when we were kids. So catching my breath for half a second. Does anybody have questions on fondue savoyard?
I don't see any questions right now, Vero.
No questions?
But it looks delicious.
Yeah, so before I switch to fondue bourguignon, are we on time? Yes. I was just going to show these other little alpine. So I love the Alps. That's where I spent most of my summers, and the winter vacation, we had a place there. And I just love the Alps. So I have all these old-fashioned posters from when they were advertising the alpine resorts early on. Those are obviously reproductions, but I have these postcards. This one is really pretty, and there was always a lady in skirts hiking the mountains, which is fun. That was an advertisement for Chamonix, which is where the Mont Blanc, the highest mount in Europe, is, well, Western Europe, and advertising the winter sports, the ski. That's one of my little, not addictions, but every time I go there or my mom goes there, she brings me something back. It's really nice. So, you're gonna give me 2 minutes. I'm gonna continue talking, but I'm gonna disappear and reappear because I'm gonna bring the stuff out for the Fondue Bourguignon.
Vero, we do have one question.
Yeah.
Do you recommend tart or sweet apples?
Tart apple and firm. So like Granny Smith, awesome. This is a Honeycrisp, a Fuji apple or Granny Smith, I would recommend, but something really firm. Like don't try to do that with a Macintosh or a Cortland because they're too soft. The meat is too soft. Okay, I'm gonna bring out the ingredients for the next dish. So this stays, which is the Fondue Bourguignon.
And Vero, one more question. Are the potatoes fully baked?
Yeah, so they're cooked. I would say like cook them so they are just cooked. Like maybe like a couple minutes less than you would normally boil them. You know, like you want them really firm when you pick them with a knife, so they don't fall apart in the fondue. And there's two, like some people just like put them on their plate and then eat them along with the bread that's been dipped and the charcuterie. But you can also dip them. So if they are still firm, they're good to dip. So that's why I said if you find really small potatoes, the really small round one or the fingerlings, and you can keep them whole instead of having to cut them, there's less risk that they're going to kind of disintegrate when you put them in the fondue. So and the other thing I was going to say is, well, in France, we can't have a meal with friends, especially, but even by yourself, without dessert. I know that's not the case here, but a fruit salad is really, after a fondue, that's usually what we had. Fruit salad, really refreshing and light, or sorbet, some type of, fruit sorbet, like berry sorbet, or cherry, something like that. But fruits is a good, end of the meal if you're gonna offer dessert. You can also offer the fruit salads are sometimes offered with meringues, which are these like puffed egg whites baked. The little ones, or the little crunchy ones that you can just eat one at a time, 2 bites with the fruit. Great dessert with a fondue savoyard. So that's the fondue. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Fondue Bourguignon. I'm not going to make one because there's nobody here to eat it. I'm just going to talk about all the ingredients and all you can do. And so I'm sure some of you have had some Fondue Bourguignon before. It was very like vogue in the 70s to have Fondue Bourguignon, which is like a meat fondue. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the history of it before telling you all about the ingredients. It needs to come first. I have my little notes here because I'm not a genius. Okay, so Fondue Bourguignon. So Bourguignon means from Burgundy. Okay, that's the term. Bourguignon means it's something from Burgundy. And actually, it's not from Burgundy. Even though the name seems to suggest so. It was actually created in a restaurant in Switzerland, in Lausanne, where that's that giant pretty lake, in 1948 by the proprietor of Café Bloch, and that was a very, very popular restaurant at the time. And his name is George Eisenwein, And he got inspired by his friends who were gypsies in Europe and who traditionally cooked meats in boiling oil in cauldrons over fire. And he thought that was a great idea. And he was trying to reproduce it on a small scale inside his restaurant for his customers because he had it. He thought that tasted great. So one of his ideas was to add different sauces to go with the meat, because the people who are eating that as a staple, really, they were just like, boiling meat, and that was it. That was the meal. That was all they were having. So George, he's like, well, I need to make a whole meal out of this for my customer, for my patrons. So he comes out with this idea of having different sauces to go with it, which I'll talk about the sauces later. And so we think that the bourguignon name of the fondue comes from actually the fact that the meat used for this fondue was always mostly beef. And when George started doing this dish, he started to use the Charolais beef, which is a breed that comes from Burgundy in France and has a high reputation for quality. And that's how we think the name came. And then in the 50s, 60s, the dish starts to become popular after another chef starts serving it in his famous Chalet Suisse restaurant, which was another famous restaurant in Switzerland, in 56. And Conrad Eli, that's his name, he's also credited to have invented the chocolate fondue. I mean, yes, you're melting chocolate, but it still had to be invented. Somebody had to think of it. And he was actually working with Toblerone, the chocolate company, to promote their chocolate. And they were trying to figure how can we get people to be more interested in our chocolate. And he came out with this idea of the chocolate fondue. So that's really interesting that he was really into fondues. And in the US, the fondue bourguignon came to light when it was presented at the Alpine restaurant in the Swiss building at the 1964 New York's World Fair. And that's when people started to discover it, and then a lot of restaurants in New York started to kind of make their own version of it. And that's really how it came in this country in 64 with the World Fair. The fondue bourguignon itself uses oil. So you can use oils that resist to high temperature because you're gonna want to get the oil to boiling before you can dip your meat in it. So it cooks really fast because you don't want to have like a hard piece of meat like a shoe sole. So you want it to cook really fast. So you want the oil to get really high temperature. So the oils you can use for that are peanut, grapeseed, or sunflower oil. And other than the peanut oil, the grapeseed and sunflower oil don't have a lot of like intense flavor. So they'll go well with the meats and the sauces and everything. You can add herbs in the oil before you start boiling it. So you can add rosemary, thyme, obviously dried. If you have some you dried from a garden, like a small branch, that's great. Otherwise, just use the one that comes in the little bottles of spices. A bay leaf would be nice, and garlic cloves. So you can add 2 or 3 chopped garlic cloves in there. Be really nice to kind of give some flavor to the oil. The meats. So you can use different meats. The original is the beef, and you need to use some good quality meat that's gonna be soft and easy to eat. That's gonna melt in your mouth. You don't want something that's gonna be tough. So you want good quality meat. So you usually like tenderloin, beef tenderloin. You can also and you cut it about 1-inch squares. That's a good size. So it doesn't cook too fast. If you have too small slices, you can also do the strips. But the strips are hard to keep on the fork because when they're cooked, they shrink a little and then they kind of tend to fall off. So I think the squares, the cubes, like kind of like the bread series, is a good shape to put in the fondue in the pot. You can also use pork belly. Pork belly, I know they serve it in a lot of restaurants now, like really crispy with the fat on the outside really crispy. So pork belly works really well in fondue. Bourguignon. You can use duck breast if you like duck. You can use chicken breast. You can use turkey. So it's really, varied. And you can either use the raw meat like that, or you can actually marinate. A lot of people like to marinate the meat before. I would not recommend to marinate in anything like too strong, because now you're gonna kind of confuse your palate with all these different flavors if you do sauces with it. And so I would feel like that using the raw meat, which is the original, non-marinated, and then the sauces around and the accompaniments be the way to go, but it's personal. And then you can have some veggies. So you can have those little, like we call them champignons de Paris, Paris champignons, those little simple, small size mushrooms, perfect. And those, they'll hold their texture great. You can use broccoli florets. You could also use cauliflower florets. You can use pieces of like red pepper, green pepper. Once again, I would advise not to cut them in strips, just to cut them in kind of like squares at least, so they hold on. And maybe you can pick like a piece of pepper and a piece of meat on the same fork. I put the little tomatoes there, but because that's a good side, not to be dipped in the boiling oil, just as a good side, kind of refreshing. And so the idea that George had was about the sauces. And so the sauces that are usually presented with the fondue bourguignon are béarnaise, which is kind of like a mayonnaise with tarragon and shallots in there. So it's you can find some. That's a French brand, and that costs like $12 on Amazon to get. So that was kind of silly, but I wanted to show it to you, and you can't find in the store locally. You can make béarnaise with this mix from Knorr, and it's actually pretty decent. And then there's a sauce bourguignon, basically, that you can find in France. Can't find it here. The closest would be this au jus mix, which is the closest to make, and it's kind of a sauce that goes really well with obviously beef. So that would be one. You can also serve mayonnaise. People make some homemade ketchup with tarragon. Tarragon, for some reason, pairs well with the flavors once you have cooked your meats in the oil. Tarragon seems to be a big ingredient in the side sauces. And then you can have horseradish, like cocktail horseradish cream, cocktail sauce, tartar sauce. And it's just like, you can mix and match. And usually you boil your meat and you get your piece of meat on your plate. And then you take just these little spoons and you take a little spoon of the sauce that you prefer to go best. And as far as the vegetables, once again, pickles are served with giardiniera, like those, because those kind of balance the taste. Not really seen potatoes served with fondue bourguignon, but you could. I would stick with kind of like those vegetables. And I was going to say that, of course, there's a lot of variations on the meat fondue. So there's the Chinese fondue, which is, some people call it the hot pot, which dates from like 10,000 years ago, and have, they're basically meat, seafood, fish, noodles, dumpling, and they present that along with a broth to cook the meat. So that's what I wanted to say, is a lot of people fondue bourguignon, they are kind of like, cooked in oil. So a lot of people have moved to have the fondue bourguignon with all the ingredients here, but using broth. And you can use veggie broth. You can use beef broth. You can make your own. You can add, like a lot of people will add red wine to the broth to give it taste. And along with the herbs I named and the garlic, will give a lot of flavor. You can add soy sauce, or you can add Worcestershire sauce. I know I didn't pronounce it correctly, sorry. But you want to like flavor if you do broth, you want to flavor it. And obviously the oil is gonna cook the meat faster. It's gonna get hotter temperature, so it's gonna cook the meat faster and kind of like grills it around. The broth, using broth is gonna be more like it's cooked, but it's not like that kind of grilled flavor. So it's a different flavor, but it's also a great way to do the fondue, and it tastes great. And you can again use a lot of different ingredients. Had the fondue Chinese with seafood. It's absolutely delicious. So that's a good way to have also use meat to have a meat dish. So I think that for me, like we had fondue bourguignon. In France, fondue savoyard is like tenfold presented in restaurant or served in restaurants, served at home, all that because of kind of the Alpine tradition than the fondue bourguignon. I know for a while there was I think the only fondue bourguignon I ever had was at my great aunt's house, and that was in the 70s. And she was very like trendy with the 70s. So I don't really know how many people have ever had fondue bourguignon, or if people have had it recently. But it's a great way to eat the same ingredients in a different way. So why not try it? And you can honestly, if you do the one with the broth, you can just use like a cast iron pan, like a Le Creuset pan on your stove. And get the broth like simmering on the high end of simmering, and or even if you want to do it with the oil, and do it that way. So voila.
Vero, there's another question. I know you mentioned you don't generally do potatoes with it, but there was a question of do you serve any starch at all with the beef fondue?
So that's interesting. Most for some reason, so same, don't know really the answer, but no. I think when people serve fondue bourguignon, they're really focused on the meat and the sauces. So there's nothing that says you can't serve potatoes with it. I would probably serve. I know it's oil and oil, but I would probably serve French fries. It's kind of like having French fries on a hanger steak. I think it would go better because French fries go really well with beef in general. So that would be my advice.
And another question was, do you ever reuse the oil?
No, sorry. Thank you. Thanks for asking, because I forgot to say. Would not reuse the oil. Yeah, just would not reuse it. Once you get it, I know, restaurant reuse your oil and everything, but once you get it to this high temperature, and especially because you're dipping meat, I would be like sanitary wise and stuff, I would be really leery of that. So I would say no. And you don't need that much oil. You need for the fondue bourguignon, I didn't say, but you basically need like 1.5 inches of oil in your pot. So you're not going to use that much. You're not going to use a whole bottle of oil, because you're just going to dip these pieces of meat at the bottom. So you're not going to use that much oil. So no.
And Vero, this isn't a question, but a comment that I missed earlier from Kathy saying, Vero, I made your stuffed peppers recipe again tonight with a big yum.
Thank you, Kathy. Enjoy. Well, I hope everyone either learned something or will try one of those, and I will be sending the recipes out tomorrow to Trisha so she can pass them on. And if you have any questions, it's like the other times. You can contact me through Trisha, no problem. Happy to answer. And is there other question, Trisha?
There's lovely comments. Steve says, Vero, thank you so much for offering this class. You know, I loved it. Rachel says this was awesome. Regina says, wonderful presentation. Thanks. And we certainly echo all of that. You're just the best. And thank you so much.
Folks, I've posted in the chat. If you thank everybody for attending, if you have a moment and you can fill out our program evaluation form, you can get these lovely comments sort of written in stone, and we'll keep them. The link is there. If you can take a minute and just fill it out, we would really appreciate it. It is one way to make sure that we continue to get programs like Vero's Great Cooking Programs on the docket for you all.
And one last comment was Anne Marie says, thank you. Fondue is a family tradition for our family. And I learned some great tips and enjoyed the history.
Awesome. Well, continue enjoying fondue, Anne Marie. Thank you so much. And I think thank you everybody for watching. And continue trying to cook when you have time and you can, and just trying new things and testing it out. Maybe you will discover a dish that you really like Cassie is still doing the pepper recipe. Somebody told me recently they were still doing the asparagus tart that I think I taught during COVID. Simple things but very tasty, flavorful, and as far as I'm concerned, I look forward to seeing everybody at our next class that we're working on with Trisha and Heather. So stay tuned for the next announcement.
Absolutely. We can't wait. Thank you for coming, everybody. And thank you, Vero. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.